Hi, my name is Elvira Horvai with NewCrits. I'm here today with the founder, Ajay Kurian. NewCrits is a global platform for virtual art mentorship and community through interviews, texts, and so much more. We're here today to explore what we mean by critique or crit and why they're so valuable. So we're using these videos for everyone to get to know the people of NewCrits. Let's start. My first question for you, are there any ways that you like to conduct critique? And does that follow in the tradition of critique that you grew up in, or did you have to find a different path?
I definitely had people that were excellent in showing me a kind of compassionate critique or what I like to call critical care. But I've also had my share of just like tear down critiques that were meant to harm you, you know, and that it was, in a sense, they still thought they were doing you a favor because if you can take this beating, then you're ready for what the world is going to throw at you. And I just think that's a really asinine way to think about it because it's not like being cruel is preparation, it's just being cruel.
Mhm.
And there are very deep and complicated ways to talk about art that have nothing to do with cruelty. Even if your art is using cruelty in it, like even if cruelty is something that you're thinking about, that's a valuable place to start thinking about art, potentially. It doesn't mean that we have to enact it to one another. And so, John Kessler comes to mind as someone who is always really compassionate and really thoughtful because he was excited about what you were excited about. And because of that, you could have a much more fruitful conversation. It was like he wanted to follow you where you went, not like, hey, let me show you where you're supposed to go. And that was always like a really great ethic um, that helped me understand that if you try to see the best in someone, they'll show you more than you had in mind.
Right, thank you for that. So, with that, what is the value in critique?
I think it's really multifaceted. I think for me, critique was the most important part of my art education because a lot of times it really exposed my blind spots. And as good as you are about trying to cover whatever ground, there are just things that you're naturally going to miss because, in a sense, to be an artist, you really have to like go in deep. You have to sort of forget so much of the world. You have to forget your inhibitions. You have to forget your insecurities. You have to forget so many things, or at least block them out temporarily. In that process, you may miss some really big things that could help you. And you're also just inviting another universe of thought. For me, critique is so helpful because I know I have a thriving universe, but when it collides with another one, there's so much that comes out of it. Like if I'm talking to someone that I trust, that's intelligent, that has a wealth of experience, like it's never not going to be a good conversation. But when this is what they do and this is what, you know, excites them, if they're really good at being like kind of a handmaiden for other people's ideas, that's that's unusual. Not everybody's great at that. Like great artists are not necessarily great at giving crits, but part of what a great valuable critique is when somebody really does know how to do those things and really can help you in terms of providing you with texts and ideas and material possibilities and ways of thinking and ways of understanding and like tips in the studio, tips outside of the studio, tips on how to like kind of keep balance in certain things. There's just, it goes further and further. And the more I realized how much my art educators were helping me both in the studio and out the studio, it really became clear that this is something that's so invaluable that I was almost like trying to learn how to do it from the jump because it just meant so much to me.
Can you tell us about a project that changed its direction through conversations with other artists?
Yes. The one that jumps out most quickly is when I was doing a 2-person booth at Art Basel with my gallery 47 Canal, and Margaret and Oliver, my gallerists, came over. And Margaret is a working artist, Margaret Lee. Oliver was at one point an artist, but is no longer a practicing one. To keep the story short, let's just say that they were these trash can sculptures that were sort of oversized. So they were custom, like I made them. And I was really obsessed with like all the overstuffed or overflowing trash cans that you see in New York all the time, where it's just like they're more exhausted than you are in a way. And there was something about that kind of empathy that I could see with the object that I wanted in the sculpture. And so I made these oversized, overflowing trash cans. And within it were all these like little vignettes and kind of what I thought were really beautiful moments, really heightened moments. There was like different LEDs and things. So it wasn't like pure realism or anything. It was kind of like almost science fiction. And a variety of different objects sort of creating these internal narratives within that like little universe of this overflowing trash can. Margaret came in and they just saw them and they were like, you really need to start over. It was like devastating to hear, but when she explained why, and when we kind of had a longer conversation about it, she was just like, you have successfully created overflowing trash cans, but there's nothing that we can find in them. Like the moments that you're showing me, they're not coming through because you've already developed this believable vocabulary that this is trash. And I'm genuinely looking at it as trash. And there's a couple of moments that are brighter than others, but it's not doing what you think it's doing.
Mhm.
And I was just like, I mean, it hurt, but she didn't mean to hurt me. I mean, I've known them for a while and I had already done a show with them, and we have a relationship that I can trust. And so if she's saying that, I have to take that to heart and figure out what I want to do with it. So she said, start over. She wasn't like throw the trash cans out or the idea is bad. But if you're looking for these moments, find the moments, like really find them. And that pushed me to kind of hone it down in a way that, yes, that experience of the overflowing trash can is a part of it. That is an important, integral part of the idea. But when I really started to hone in on it, it started to crystallize in a totally new way. And the sculptures were infinitely better for that conversation. Like they really became what they are because I had to start over.
Wow. At what point in your process do you find yourself in need of feedback?
I'm sort of almost always open to feedback. There's never a point where I wouldn't welcome some kind of critique. Because also I think I've gotten to a point where I can take and leave what I want. You know, if a person's telling me, even prescriptively telling me like, you should really do this, you should really do that. It doesn't faze me at all. It's just that's their journey. It's not mine. And some of it might be useful and some of it might not. But I think the moments that are really generative and helpful is actually, I wouldn't even call it the moment. It's generative and helpful when a person is there to witness what you're doing at any stage that you're at and listen and learn and try to help you at that moment. If it's so far along and like the show's like a month away, I'm not necessarily looking for feedback then. That's a moment when things are relatively precarious in my head. I've finished what I need to do, and maybe after the fact we can have a conversation. I can benefit from that. But leading up and building it, unless it's very private and I still don't know exactly what it is I'm doing and I need that privacy, that would be the only other time that I would hold off on a critique. But if it's something that I know it's the seed of something and I really just want to like, I want to sort of throw it out there and just kind of get a general sense of like how that's working, even if it's not fully working yet. I really like that as a moment to have a conversation with someone, because it just tells me a lot. It's like intel. It's not going to change like, oh, well, they didn't like it. It's really just intel to be like, okay, so that's what happened. I witnessed what happened, and now we're going to move forward.
Okay, so last question for today is, where do you find inspiration?
Depending on like what year you ask me, it changes dramatically. I guess it's always going to come from my life, my lived experience. It almost always has something to do with what I'm reading. I don't know, literature and stories and narratives are really important to me. And how we tell those stories is important to me. But my own lived experience tells me a lot. And it kind of gives me the intuition to know what I want to see in the world. So it's an everyday thing. And I can also sense when I'm in the flow and when I'm not in the flow. So if I'm not, then I start looking for inspiration or a spark of something more actively. Sometimes that means that I'm like looking really external, like I'm just like out there, just kind of like trying to absorb and just like take walks and maybe go to shows here and there. Most of the time, what that means is that I haven't spent enough time with myself and I haven't given myself enough quiet to hear what's really going on in my head. Because as soon as I do give myself quiet, it's like I have like a million ideas. But when I'm a little panicked, then, and I'm like, am I doing anything? Do I know what I'm doing? The whole world shrinks, my world shrinks, and it becomes a really bad feedback loop. So I'm, I'm not the first person to experience that. It's to break out of that is really just to like, okay, how do you find your peace and how do you move from there so that you can start, in a sense, feeling your feelings and understanding the intellect of those feelings again.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, thank you for this conversation.
Thanks, Elvira.